Hello, welcome to another F2 Pool mining interview series. I'm joined by Daniel Jonsson. My name is Daniel Huang. I'm special projects lead at F2 Pool. Let's get started. Daniel, if you could quickly introduce yourself, the company you work at, and some of the interesting stuff that you've been working on in brief that we can go into a bit later.
Yeah. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for inviting me on. So my name is Daniel Jonsson. I work within the mining industry here in Iceland. I am the CEO of a company called GreenBlocks, which is a relatively new project, not our first project, but this one is a new enterprise and brand, if we will, where we want to focus on one side mining Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies here in Iceland on renewable energy, hence the green part of our name. But we also want to partner up with those that have excess energy. It's most often those producing power, but in some cases it can be large-scale buyers of power who for some reason have excess energy. At any rate, we want to partner up with parties like those and help them maximize the utilization of their power. And there's a convergence there between these two industries that is largely unexplored. When we meet those that are in the power production industry, we often get into conversations where they're having a few eureka moments when we're explaining how mining works and what it can do in terms of optimizing power grids and networks.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to kind of dive into some of the energy efficiency and clean energy sourcing versus other sources of energy in terms of the Bitcoin mining space in a bit. But yeah, I guess we could start out with some warm up topics, just like some general information. I think everyone always has like an origin story of how they got into crypto and Bitcoin. So yeah, if you can share a bit about how you started your career as a miner, what got you interested in cryptocurrency, what was the Bitcoin landscape like back then? I think a lot of people would be interested to hear that.
Sure. As for many, it's not a linear path, to where I wound up today necessarily. But so my background is in IT. Been an IT specialist for a long time. I mean, I started working in 2002 here in Iceland, and lived abroad for a while in France and Ireland. In roles like, I was a senior server analyst for Dell for a few years in Ireland and so on. Came back here to Iceland and wound up in 2016. I was working at a company. I kind of pivoted a bit into more on the business side, sales and so on, and kind of capitalizing on my technical experience. And so I was working for the biggest IT services provider here in Iceland. And these guys had a sister company at the time, which was a data center. And I had access to, within my role, I had access to a mailbox that was just flooded with inbound requests from people trying to place mining equipment. And this is, I'd heard about Bitcoin, but I had never dove in. It's in hindsight, I feel it's a bit weird that it was so close, and a couple of times I read a little bit about it, but it was just kind of like the time. It just never happened that I actually dove in and went down the rabbit hole. But at this point, I'm seeing this massive request for space in an Icelandic data center purely for mining equipment. And it kind of made me think, it kind of made me go, this is a massively growing industry, it would seem. Like, this is This is scaling rapidly, apparently, and at that point, that data center had been scaling fairly rapidly up on the back of mining. So that's the point at which I kind of take some time, start reading about mining, and I really got into crypto through mining. I mined my first Bitcoin. I didn't buy it. So yeah, this is 2016, 27, or like end of 2016, early 2017, and I kind of just went in. Sorry about that. That's my dog opening the door to my office. So yeah, so I started out, I bought some equipment with a couple of guys I know, and kind of just started dabbling in this. But really, and as is with so many people who kind of get into this and start understanding, like, once I understood proof of work and what this is and where it's coming from, I was just absolutely fascinated by the topic. And it captivated me. I guess I'm one of the people who has that type of head where, if I find something and I find it super interesting, everything else kind of falls from the sides, and I kind of hyper focus on that. And that's what happened. I mean, for months, this is what, sure, I was doing something else for a day job at that time, but this is what I was interested in. This is what I was thinking about, learning about this. How does it work? What are the dynamics of this industry, and so on. And I was lucky enough that a few months later, that data center was kind of officially split away from that IT services company. And as a part of that, the CEO of the data center, the guy who became the CEO of the data center, was building a team and offered me a place on that team. So I became the director of blockchain technologies for this data center. Stayed there for about a year. And end of 2018, the Great Bear Winter is kind of where we split paths. And in the beginning of 2019, I branched out on my own. Basically, we raised funds for a mining operation here in Iceland, which we then launched mid 2019, and we've been running that since. And that has then through a bit of a evolution, we wind up, we still, that's still ongoing. That project is still ongoing. And today we're working on building up this new brand of GreenBlocks.
Awesome. Yeah, I also started my dive into the rabbit hole as a miner, awesome. A Bitcoin and Dogecoin miner when Dogecoin had first come out. But that's pretty cool. Yeah, I guess I'd be super interested, since you've been in and working in and around like the data center, the IT sector, and the Bitcoin sector in Iceland. Can you tell us a little bit about like the Icelandic kind of regulatory environment, the policy environment? Like, is it favorable, or does kind of like the government in Iceland understand like crypto and mining, and are they pretty open to talking about how it should be kind of monitored, or is it not monitored, strict or friendly? Yeah, I think that would be a fascinating kind of to hear from you.
Yeah. So I want to say that the regulatory environment here in Iceland isn't necessarily super clear, in the sense that it's not as if we've taken a stance and this is how we will treat cryptocurrencies and so on. But there, as with every country, there are rules and regulations within which we must operate. So, dealing with banks and funds and all that, we all have to go through the same AML, KYC procedures and all of that. We pay our taxes here in Iceland and all of that. I think that in terms of being favorable towards the industry, it would be very hard for the government and the country of Iceland not to be favorable, particularly since power grids are complicated, and Iceland, we're an island in the middle of the Northern Atlantic Ocean. We have no connections to outside countries with regards to our power grid. So we're an absolutely isolated grid, which makes us, I believe, the only grid in the world that's running on 100% renewable energy. There is nothing else on our grid. It's about an 85-15 split of hydro versus geothermal. But so at some point, someone figured out that we could, in fact, export energy and electricity by heavy industries. So the aluminium industry was the first target within that. And we have a few aluminium smelters here in Iceland. The big companies like Rio Tinto and Century Aluminium have facilities here in Iceland. And this was a way for us to capitalize on the natural resources that we wanted to capitalize on, and essentially export electricity and create jobs, further jobs out of that industry, and so on. So that's great, but the problem when you're selling large scale electricity to these heavy industry plants is they need guaranteed power. So an aluminium smelter that's drawing 400 megawatts needs those 400 megawatts absolutely guaranteed, which means there needs to be excess power on the grid that's ready for, if there's any type of malfunction or anything comes up, there needs to be additional power ready. And essentially, there was no large scale buyer willing or able to step into this environment and say, listen, I'm willing to buy power. I'm willing to buy 50 or 100 megawatts here, and on the condition that you can cut the power off. This is the whole load balancing, as we've seen discussed a lot in Texas, for example. The concept of you can shut us off. If there's a problem on the grid, you can just turn us off. If we're down for a day or 2 or 3 days, it's not the end of the world for us. While these heavy industries, they just can't do that. They'll have multi-million-dollar damages if their power gets cut off. So all of a sudden, there's an industry that's willing to buy some of this excess energy that was an unsellable product previously. So, all this to say, all of a sudden, a new industry has stepped in. It's an industry that's not polluting. It's running. It's a large scale consumer of electricity, and it's willing to buy a certain type of product of electricity which no one would buy previously. So all of a sudden, we are generating revenue from a resource that was generating zero revenue previously, perhaps. And I'm not saying 100% of the usage of electricity of data centers in Iceland is of this type of power, if you get what I mean. We're certainly not only buying, what's the word in English? Non-guaranteed power. We're definitely also buying guaranteed power, but it is a mix, and so this and the fact that all of a sudden there's a data center industry in Iceland, which is essentially the first competitor in terms of buying electricity from the Icelandic market that is not a heavy industry, that is essentially a green industry. So there's that factor as well. And so, overall, I think it would be a very, very, weird situation if any regulatory changes would come out that would affect this industry negatively. There's no special taxes on us. There's no, there is VAT and so on in Iceland, but if you're operating within the brackets of that, which the data center companies, for example, definitely are, then these are refundable charges and so on. So, and in general, if you are running a branch here, there's a 20% tax on corporate gains, or enterprise tax. But in a lot of cases, and in most cases, the data center companies or the operating companies of the equipment are in turn selling hash rates to a foreign entity. So, you're not necessarily just running a pure Icelandic company when you're running a mining operation in Iceland. It's usually a hybrid where you have an Icelandic branch and then you have a foreign parent company, if you will.
Got it. Yeah, that is such fascinating clarity into the thing. I think the efficiency concept that you mentioned with load balancing, which we definitely have seen in Texas with like the heat, when there's heat waves, everyone's running their AC, and then these mining companies, as you mentioned, come in as kind of last resort options for the local governments to kind of rely on, of like, yeah, we can turn it off, and then we can kind of solve a lot of problems for people who need to have electricity immediately. I think it makes so much sense for local, regulatory agencies or just those jurisdictions to kind of not demonize mining or crypto as it has been more adopted. And I think especially in your case, because Iceland is, as you mentioned, 85% hydro, 15% geothermal, it's all clean. So there's really nothing to be said. Yeah. And I guess regarding that point, because Iceland is completely relying on renewable energy, we have definitely, as the cryptocurrency ecosystem, or more particularly the proof of work ecosystem, right? A lot of people have criticized the cryptocurrency ecosystem for using non-renewable energy. And there obviously are quite a few takes on this issue Some would be some are very adamantly against the whole ESG, concept of it being unfairly levied on cryptocurrency when there's a lot of other industries that are worse, like 9 times worse, or more, like the aerospace industry, and the type of value that it produces. Obviously, the aerospace industry is immensely important to everyone, but it's right. One could even say like a global financial system is just as important, if not more important, and that. So, I'd actually be curious as to because Iceland is 100% renewable, and as you had mentioned, as a part of sort of your origin story, there were so many people who were interested in kind of setting up mining operations in Iceland, even before this crazy adoption cycle that we've seen today, which I think is rightfully kind of, we've rightfully found our place in adoption today. Were the people who are seeking mining operations in Iceland in the past, were those type of customers seeking it for different reasons as the customers that are seeking it today?
I think, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that in general, yes, there is a certain shift in the type of customer. I think so. There are a lot of people interested in mining. Naturally, it is an interesting industry. It's a fascinating industry. It's a new technology that is changing things. So, from that standpoint alone, it's interesting, but then you can make money off it, which makes a lot more people interested in it. I think that the maturity of this industry, it's matured a lot in the past, 3-4 years. The mix was it was more mixed. You had more small or medium scale miners, running their equipment, a couple of hundred machines and so on, and looking for space in a data center. But then in the past 2 years alone, we've seen such massive growth of the industry. I truly believe, and I've said this before in interviews, like, I believe what we're seeing right now is the birth of the, Rio Tinto, Century Aluminum type companies within our, mining of digital assets industry. So, you have these big players like Bitfarms and, Foundry have stepped in, and there are lots of big players, Hut 8 and so on, that are already publicly traded and so on. And so I think, looking at that from the outside can kind of scare a lot of people away from thinking, should I buy 5 machines and run them somewhere? And rightly so, because if you buy 5 machines and you want to buy data center hosting for them, your operating costs are always going to be significantly higher than for someone who's running thousands of machines, perhaps in their own data center and so on. But this is inevitable, and the maturity of this industry is inevitable. Like, at the moment, we see some pretty crazy profit margins and so on, and that's all going to level out. I mean, there is a future where this is an industry like most others, where you're maybe operating at some 20% profit margin, and that's perfectly normal and acceptable. And we can't really expect to see 90% profit margins forever. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a change in the type of people looking to mine, I think, and that's just in line with the whole maturity of the industry. Like, we're getting more institutionalized in every aspect.
Amazing. And when people sometimes hear of like the 90 to 90% profit margin, it's quite, you raise your eyebrows, and it sounds sometimes too good to be true, but it is actually true. I'd be curious as to, like, when people do, is there a particular ESG focus that you've kind of seen with inbound requests to start setting up, or is that something sort of the some more of like the critics have been kind of pointing their fingers to, of, yes, everyone needs to be ESG compliant because it's good, but there's obviously very many opinions on ESG. Some people might even say that ESG is like a standard that a lot of people think is unfairly levied on cryptocurrency miners, because you can have there's so many nuances to, like, what energy efficiency is, renewable and non-renewable, how you're using that energy, versus kind of abiding by kind of, like, some would say, an almost arbitrary standard from compliance markets and even voluntary markets. But yeah, I'd be really interested in kind of getting your take on that. And I know that you do have something directly involved with the carbon markets as well, but yeah. So yes, it's a funny coincidence or non-coincidence. I mean, we are involved in the carbon credits industry. I am the chairman of the board of the International Carbon Registry, which is a new registry. But I mean, that's maybe a bit aside from this. But I mean, so this is a super deep question. I want to say, so maybe to start off with, I think that Iceland has always gotten a relatively higher share of ESG focused projects, if you will, particularly just because, when you mine in Iceland, you can be assured that you are mining on renewable energy. Regardless of what data center you're partnered with or what power company you're buying your power from. So that's one element, and we as an industry can't ignore the ESG narrative. The ESG narrative is a real one, and it certainly is a necessary one. I mean, we do need to reduce pollution in the world. We need to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases, and so yes, to keep on that first part of the question, I mean, throughout the years, we've certainly seen a lot of interest, because sometimes you'll have an institutional investor who's backing a project, and their mandate is clearly
we are not participating in this if it's not ESG, if it doesn't run on 100% renewable energy, we're not putting money into it. So, we have, just clear-cut cases. We've seen clear-cut cases of this where you have maybe a pension fund in a European country who's partnering up with a large mining company, and they're just saying, listen, yeah, we'll put money into this, but it has to be in Iceland. So that's the demand, So that type of client may also be willing to pay a slightly higher price for power, because in Iceland, one thing about Iceland, we're certainly not in some race to the bottom with regards to power prices either. You can find parts of the world where you can get cheaper power, but it's not going to be in the country that is, has been ranked number one for the safest location of a data center in the world multiple times. There's always a trade-off somewhere, and for some customers, this is a big requirement. But and yes, I think it's definitely an unfair demand for any industry to say, listen, you have to be you have to run everything on 100% renewable energy. How are you supposed to do that when there's barely any place in the world where the grid is running on 100% renewable energy? It's next to impossible, and an industry like this one will never reach that goal. But for me, I've always kind of very much leaned towards the concept of, this is a very young industry, and it exploded very quickly. Like it grew very, very rapidly into a very large and global industry. And there are growing pains behind that. But I do believe in a future where mining gets to some sense even further decentralized, with more participation from power producers or even nation states. And you can just imagine, most power grids have a lot of excess power during the night. And, if you're getting fairly decentralized global participation, you could be seeing an, evening out of the hash rate. If I'm mining, if I'm running 50 megawatts only during the nighttime, and then someone who's 8 hours ahead of me, he's also running 100 megawatts, but only during the nighttime. The optimization of power grids and the whole power narrative is a super complicated one. And the optimization of power grids is super complicated. Even here in Iceland, they're having massive problems with the power grid. You can't get the power you want anywhere you want because it's hard to transport power. And that's where this concept of stranded energy comes from. So, I really think that the ESG narrative and the ESG criticism will be a thing of the past in the next, 3 to 5 years for our industry, because I think that we can and have the willingness to be on the greener side, be on the ESG side of the power industry, really. And you're right, there are some people who are kind of hard line against, it's just greenwashing and so on. But in reality, as I mentioned earlier, it's something that we as a global society needs to think about and need to be responsible around. And it kind of I see that sometimes the guys who are working on gas, for example, using stranded stranded gas in relation to oil wells and so on. Sometimes I hear them fighting this, but I don't even get that, because if you take the gas that is being flared and you run that through a generator, you reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases by about 70%, as opposed to flaring the gas. So running a mining operation at an oil field on gas that would have been flared is an ESG project. Like you could literally issue carbon credits for the reduction in emissions that you have created. So that's not a non-ESG narrative at all. It's a good thing that we can leverage our industry to reduce flaring. And numbers have shown, I believe, the flaring in North America alone would be enough to power the entire Bitcoin network. So that's ignoring flaring in the rest of the world, you know.
Wow, that does sound like a lot, which is, I think, maybe it's just a education that the rest of the world needs to understand, and kind of the nuances specifically there. Thank you so much. That was so insightful. I would love to kind of hear a little bit more about, as you had mentioned, right there, the particular type of customer that does come to Iceland, right, sometimes are, as you had mentioned, coming to for ESG reasons, and all that aside, right, it's their opinion and perspective, and either if they operate in compliance markets or they're doing this voluntarily. Like the pricing, have you had a chance to kind of take a look at like the difference in pricing, right? So, you know, some regions in the world are renewable, some are using non-renewable, and they can get prices down to like, you know, between 3 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Is it pretty competitive in Iceland as well? Right. Obviously, you get the added benefit and perhaps even the premium that you can enjoy from using completely renewable energy in Iceland. But right, is the pricing quite similar, or is there like a hefty kind of added tax? But
No, I mean you can be looking at pricing in that range, maybe the upper bounds of that range. You know, if you're buying data center hosting, I'd say, you know, and that's, you know, then you someone else is providing you with the facilities and everything. You can probably be looking at, depending on your scale and everything, you can probably be looking at a cost of, you know, maybe the 4.8 to 6 cent range. But that's not your power cost. That's your cost at a data center. Your power cost could obviously be lower, but the barriers of entry to coming to Iceland and actually, you know, building a data center or such are quite high. It's a complicated system. You need to talk to a lot of stakeholders. You know, you need to talk to the national company that runs the grid. You need to talk to the power producers and so on. So, and 90% of the power production in Iceland is, you know, public companies. So it's, you know, state owned essentially. But yeah, so it's a complicated landscape, which is why I would say, you know, pretty much everyone who wants to operate in Iceland or has operated in Iceland in the past have always done so in partnership with a local data center company. Almost, yeah, like nobody has come here and built their own data center essentially, because it's a complicated landscape and so on. But yeah, I mean, that price range is something you can find in Iceland. So when you see that, you know, the premium that I'm talking about, it's not that great. It's tiny. And if you're weighing, if you're weighing, listen, I can save half a cent or 1 cent on power, but you're going to be in a location where, listen, if, you know, the owner of that hosting facility that you have your equipment at says the wrong thing, you know, they might not be the owner of that data center anymore. And so, like, political risks, physical risks to your equipment and so on, when all that is counted in, if you make a comparison list, you really can't find a better location for this industry than, or data center industries in general, than Iceland, really.
yeah, it honestly seems like the mining industry and the folks there are like in a very good place, both socially from the ESG narrative as well as regulatory wise, as you had mentioned, with the type of dynamic that has resulted from the sort of load balancing concept, which I think is, you guys are very fortunate, and I only if the rest of the world were like that, that would be amazing. I'm actually curious, and you had mentioned this a bit with your using flared gas comment. Obviously, the world is not completely renewable. We wouldn't be having these sorts of ESG conversations if it were. But how do you kind of see the sort of the rest of the world operating? And maybe this is kind of like a tie into the stuff that you do at the ICR, the International Carbon Registry project. But right, the whole world is not able to operate on renewable immediately. Perhaps in the future, if we all go nuclear or something, but there's like an ideal that we all kind of strive for, or let's say what I mean by we is like the cryptocurrency ecosystem, and there are a lot of really valiant efforts from some key opinion leaders, right? Like notably Elon Musk, who said he wants everyone to go green, right? If Bitcoin goes over 50% green, then he's gonna, I think, start letting you purchase Teslas with Bitcoin. But right, it's a bit idealistic. I don't think we can get there immediately, but there's this sort of what can we do now? Right, we can switch everything to renewable. We can try, maybe not get there, but there's going to be a solid, sizable chunk of the hash rate that is not able to be using sort of ESG compliant renewable energy. However, like let's just say on the end of the spectrum of like, green power being like, hydro, solar, wind, and geothermal, et cetera. And then there's like a sizable chunk that's left. How do you kind of see the rest of the world engaging with that? Or how do you think the rest of the world should be engaging with that? Do they just like give up, like, oh, we can't use renewable, so we're screwed? Or obviously other solutions, right? Like offsetting or using something else in tandem. But
yeah, I mean, to be honest, like I think that we don't have far to go to be over 50% renewable. I honestly think we're already there, particularly because we are a buyer of last resort. We generally, and I mean, we as an industry, mining, we generally try to seek out low OPEX, or low operating costs, and the lowest operating costs tend to be renewable energy, and the lowest cost of renewable energy tends to be stranded renewable energy, because that is a thing. There are locations where you may have built hydropower plants, and they're a bit future proof. Obviously, they have an output of 100 megawatts, but the grid in that area can only transport 70 megawatts, and in the coming 5 years they will be able to transport those other 30 megawatts, and by that time, that's when we expect there to be demand for that power. So you have 30 megawatts of stranded energy. Who could come there and buy the energy for however long it is for sale? It's us. Like, we're literally willing to show up and install facilities in locations where these conditions arise. So that's certainly a factor of it, and this is why I do believe that 50% should be an easily attainable goal for us, and we probably already are there, particularly with the exodus of equipment out of China, which I think kind of reduces the ambiguity around the actual power we use. And I would, for one, love for us to be able to build some sort of a framework where we can kind of certify that and just put a stamp on how much of the grid, how much of the hash rate of the world essentially is on renewable energy already. It would be a slightly complicated feat, but it can be done. With regards to the parts of the industry that won't be able to go green, that won't be able to go and operate on renewables yet, or for some reason, some countries have their grids on a far majority of non-renewable energy, and they may wish to participate in the industry. They may wish to mine Bitcoin, and that should be okay. But I think that as a whole, we can even go down the road of, regardless what you think of the ESG narrative, regardless of whether you can even be in the place where you don't believe in climate change and you don't think this is an issue. We're doing business, and that really doesn't matter. What matters is what the public opinion is, like what the macro market is saying. And this is the shift. This is the focus. The focus is very much on ESG. There is a big focus on that. So we can safely deduce that we have a vested interest in being as green of an industry as we can. It's literally going to be good for us, particularly if we look at the fact that, this is our biggest point of criticism as an industry. Cryptocurrencies, the ESG narrative is the biggest point of criticism that people have on us. And a lot of people are just playing into that. A lot of people just don't like Bitcoin. They don't believe in Bitcoin. They work for a central bank, or for whatever the reason may be for them to be against Bitcoin. This is just an easy place to hit us on. So it's definitely in the industry's interest to, kind of try to erase that, force them to make a proper argument, not just, oh, it uses more power than Ireland. So in terms of solutions, I mean, you mentioned offsetting. Offsetting is an obvious option, and it doesn't have to be super expensive. And there are definitely multiple ways of achieving it. And I really think that if we agree to, and we're always talking about utopian ideals of everyone agreeing to do something, and we never all agree. So but that's okay. Like, this is a free market. One of the beauties of Bitcoin is it's very much about freedom. And so essentially we should be allowed to do what we want. If someone wants to go down the route of kind of trying to ESG certify themselves as a data center or as a mining facility and so on, they should be allowed to do that. And if someone doesn't, then fair enough. I think it is really my belief that we as a whole will gain a lot from just deleting this narrative entirely. Like you said, people that have a huge platform like Elon Musk are talking about this and are saying, listen, you guys need to do better. So that's really what we need to do to increase adoption, to kind of increase faith in this whole thing, because it's still super young. A lot of people think that this is air, it's built on nothing, and so on. So yeah, I mean, my views on that are definitely in that sense. And as I mentioned, I would love to be able to create some sort of standard or certification where we can kind of just certify a certain amount of hash rate, just go around and create some level of certification for data centers, just so that we can have kind of on paper, listen, we know for 100% sure, it's a guaranteed fact that this many participants in the network are 100% renewable. Like, that would be big, because I think if we did that, we could just show Elon that paper, in 12 months time and say, look, we've been running over 50% green since 2018 or 17 or whatever.
Yeah, those are fascinating and amazing points. I think what you're touching at is, like, we need, regardless of whether or not the criticisms are legitimate, and maybe it's some of it is, and right, and where we have to take responsibility of it, but some of it may be misguided because of lack of education or understanding. Right. If we are able to kind of, as you said, lead this and face it head on, then we can be blameless, right? We are actually doing what we need to do. We're taking responsibility and stewardship over this problem, and we can kind of show an example that we are acting in good faith, as well. I think, I believe, even as kind of like Elon and I think Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy has mentioned, right? This is a very efficient means of kind of storing and using excess energy when people don't need it. And so, and right, a lot of people kind of when they fixate on the spectrum of ESG of non-renewable, right? There is a point to be made where efficiency kind of goes into that, where you can kind of complement, right? Even if someone is using non-renewable energy, the efficiency that is being produced by using that non-renewable energy as opposed to other sources is also doing positive and doing positive things for that. I'd love to kind of get your take on right the offsetting if you'd like to talk about that. I know you'd like the carbon offsetting, what that looks like, and as well as maybe a bit later some of the concepts of standardization, because I know that is a very like hot topic and a lot of people have very strong opinions of that. But yeah, first, if you could talk a little bit about, right, we can go renewable and you guys are doing renewable. And I think it's extremely noble and valiant of you guys to also be interested in like the offsetting part, which I think the rest of the world has to really lean into. But yeah, if you can talk a little bit about ICR, and then I'd love to talk about some of the standardization stuff that you've been hinting at.
Yeah, so ICR is the International Carbon Registry. We're at carbonregistry.com. If anyone wants to take a look at that, or just find me on LinkedIn if you want to have a chat about that. But yeah, so it's a registry. It's not an exchange. It's essentially just what we do is we issue carbon credits. So a project, we have a couple of projects that are live already, which are forestry projects here in Iceland. Where one of the large companies here in Iceland that own retail stores, they own gas stations and so on, they want to essentially offset their own emissions, their company's emissions. I mean, they have trucks and so on, and they're petrol stations. So so they bought a large piece of land. They partnered up with the Icelandic Department of Forestry to actually grow forests on that land. And then a project like that then can have a third party, an independent third party, which is not us, come along and just kind of certify it according to very strict guidelines and rule sets that and methodologies that we operate by. Well, you know, how much will this forest, in this case, for example, offset? Like how much CO2 are they going to bind for, you know, whatever year? And once they kind of have that certified and audited, they can come to us with that audit and say, listen, we want to issue this many tons of CO2. Basically, you know, one credit is 1 ton. So, you know, we want to issue this many credits with you guys per year for this many years. And it's a necessary element. Like the carbon credits markets are really still developing. They're quite young. We have like mandatory markets, which are like quotas. You know, in Europe, we have this quota system. These are voluntary credits. So these are companies that are conscious of this fact because, you know, let's face it, consumers are very conscious of these facts and they ask about these things, and more companies are voluntarily offsetting. So, and there is a big market with, you know, not everyone just buys land and grows forests. More companies would rather just buy the credits to offset their own emissions. And the super important part of this, and the reason this is not, you know, any level of greenwashing is for one, I mean, everything is fully audited by independent third parties. We're not just in the business of just creating credits out of thin air and all that. But secondly, the whole concept of this is to be able to finance climate projects. So like forestry, you know, in the past, like who's going to invest in forestry? Sure, you know, you might be able to get some returns when you sell the lumber in 20 years or whatever. But this whole industry is pushing the growth of climate project. And what's particularly interesting and what we certainly want to work with are carbon removal projects. And there are some super interesting things happening in the world on that scale at the moment, where people are literally capturing CO2 from the environment and binding it. In Iceland, we have one where they take CO2 and they bind it in basalt, which is a rock formation, and they literally take CO2. And we will be in a position where we can literally import CO2 and pump it into the ground and bind it in the rock formation underneath Iceland. So, and that opens, obviously, that whole thing opens up the possibility of these projects to go into lenders and banks and get financing for their projects. What do you call it? With the future credits as collateral, for example, which is certainly necessary for the growth of this industry as a whole.
That's so fascinating. I think it really touches and hits home on one of my favorite kind of concepts of even how like the Bitcoin consensus mechanism works, right? Good behavior has to be incentivized. Good behavior cannot rely on altruism. And I think, right, with these, as you had mentioned, right, not only do people get the benefits of, sequestering carbon, but it's incentivized because people are purchasing it, and you obviously make a profit on it. And as you had pointed out, you are really kind of honing in on supporting these industries, these carbon projects and sequestration projects, and more. I would love to kind of get your take on standardization and also kind of fungibility. So, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of people who are kind of looking at standardization from ESG as kind of very restrictive, and some would say even almost arbitrary set of guidelines that people have of this is what is ESG compliant, this is not what is ESG compliant. And that goes deeply into the nuances of what I briefly mentioned, right? And that kind of goes into, right, there are many carbon registries that exist. There's like the VCS, et cetera, and with like the different standards, like the red standard of what type of carbon sequestration does kind of feed into these type of registries. And right, and I know the carbon debate, the carbon credits debate is as old as time, right? Where some people are saying this is legitimate, some people are saying this is not legitimate. How do you see like ICR kind of fitting into that? And I'm assuming you guys have had your fair share of conversations with other registries, as well as like the support of your projects, seeking that, as you had mentioned, independent third parties.
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially, our registry was born in Iceland out of the need for such a registry in Iceland, but it very quickly became apparent that there's still a need for more players in this space globally. And that's how we became the International Carbon Registry, not just the Icelandic Carbon Registry or whatever. So, I mean, standardization in this is hugely important. And there is a pretty level playing field. I mean, particularly in over here in Europe, we have types of credits based on a methodology called CDM, which was born under the Tokyo Climate Agreement, and so there's sort of like a fairly level playing field, and it doesn't look like anyone is really playing outside of that, and you can't. I mean, it is a global market. There are lots of different exchanges. There's a very large OTC market with carbon credits. So we need to be on a level playing field. We need to be good actors, and it would only devalue our own project if we, for example, were on some level cutting corners or going, hey, listen, register with us, and you can do it quicker, or we'll just skip checking this part. Like that's never going to work. there are nuances, and as I mentioned earlier, it's a fairly underdeveloped industry, the carbon credits industry and the issuances of credits and so on. We have some nonprofits in the space, Gold Standard and Vera, for example, and apparently, like, sometimes their focus can be not purely on helping these projects issue their carbon credits, but their kind of standard set of requirements may have some elements to it which can be great, which are, for example, you need to check the box of being in an underdeveloped geographical region. So they're really trying to push the growth of these types of projects within specific geographical regions and so on, which doesn't necessarily benefit everyone in the industry. We, for example, have we're having some big conversations with companies that are over in Asia, for example, where they cannot issue on these platforms anymore because they don't count as being an underdeveloped geographical region. So you have massive solar projects that are definitely going to reduce emissions because they're shifting from carbon fuels to renewables, but they all of a sudden no longer have a platform to issue their credits on. And for us in particular, we certainly want to work with new tech startups because the path to market can be quite complicated for them, because if you have new technology, nobody has verified it before. You literally need to put a lot of work into actually creating the rule set and the methodology for issuing those credits. So that can be a complicated process, and it's certainly something that we want to assist with. And our founder and CEO has actually been doing that for a while. That's how he comes into the whole carbon credits market. Is he's been helping out with creating rule sets for new tech and for the Icelandic industry and so on. So that's kind of how he segued into this. But I mean, standardization and everybody playing on the same on a level playing field is obviously super, super important for an industry like this one, because if at some point we are, like I mentioned earlier, if at some point any of the players of this industry are cutting corners, it's bad for the industry as a whole. So I think that, if you're talking to someone who's at any level, reputable and serious about this industry, that shouldn't be a problem you're going to face. But, I think it can be expected, as with any new industry, we might see some cowboys, but that's definitely not our approach to this.
Amazing. I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation and kind of do a deeper dive into what you guys are doing, especially with you guys, right, being at the perfect kind of like trifecta of being in Iceland, having renewable energy, being part of the mining industry, and also as part of the mining industry facing and dealing with these sorts of carbon credit issuance platforms and registries and together at the same time. And I really do believe that, as you had said, right, the cryptocurrency industry, especially the proof of work mining industry, does need to kind of have the responsibility of tackling these issues head on and leading the narrative there. And I really do think you guys are basically leading, right, breaking new ground and kind of showing the world like how it can be done. I'm very excited to kind of see what you guys are going to be continue to do in the future. And I definitely know that you guys are going to have a big impact on at the global scale. Is there anything that you kind of like would like to say, or maybe have people kind of check out if they're interested? Especially, right, you guys have like the mining industry. If people are interested in getting access to Iceland and working with you guys, as well as like the offset industry or even the registry industry, or just send people to like the relevant like links that you guys have. Just closing thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first off, thank you for the conversation. Definitely always fun to talk about these things. And as you said, we could sit here for hours and hours and talk about this. Yeah, I mean, in terms of GreenBlocks is definitely looking for partners, both power producers and those interested in getting involved in mining. ICR is also looking for partners, but I think that's a bit further outside. Maybe we only went live middle of August, so it's very, very new. We're already talking to people pretty much in all corners of the globe. As I said, there is a need for this. And we definitely want to, as you just mentioned, we want to be a key player in this and help grow these two industries. And there is a synergy between the two. It's probably best to just find me. I'm Daniel Jonsson on LinkedIn. I'm DF Jonsson, JONSSON on Twitter. Just seek me out if you have thoughts or comments or want to engage in any way.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for your time. I know we went a bit over, but yeah, looking forward to continuing. Really happy to have you as part of like the F2 Pool family. And as you know, we've been doing a lot of stuff, investigating systems and designing systems to do carbon offset and figuring out how to like use registries like yours or carbon credit registries. And yeah, awesome. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Daniel Jonsson. And I will follow up later.
Bye. Great. Thank you, Daniel. Bye-bye.